In his death row cell, with his final hours ticking away, the door suddenly swung open, and a guard shouted, "Stop!" But this last-minute reprieve left a question hanging in the air. Would this man's escape from death lead to freedom or a nightmare beyond the prison walls? James Carter was a man who had spent nearly 2 decades of his life confined within the cold, unforgiving walls of Indiana State Maximum Security Prison, a facility known for housing some of America's most dangerous criminals. His story begins in 2005 when a double murder rocked a quiet Indiana suburb, leaving 2 lives extinguished in a robbery gone horribly wrong. Carter, then 18 years old, was arrested and charged with the crime, his fate sealed by a jury that saw no mercy in his youthful eyes. The evidence against him was damning. Eyewitness accounts placed him at the scene, and a bloody knife found in his possession bore traces of the victim's DNA. The trial was swift, and the verdict was clear: death by lethal injection. For 20 years, he lived under the shadow of that sentence, his appeals dwindling with each passing year, until August 2025, when his execution date was finally set for midnight on the 15th. The days leading up to that night were a blur of routine and dread. Carter spent his time in a solitary cell on death row, a 6 by 9 foot space with a steel bed, a toilet, and a single window too high to see out of. He read old magazines, wrote letters that were never sent, and listened to the distant echoes of other inmates' voices. The prison staff, hardened by years of overseeing such cases, prepared the execution chamber with clinical precision. The gurney was tested, the lethal injection drugs were checked, and the warden, a man named Robert Hayes, reviewed the protocol one last time. Hayes, a veteran of the prison system, had overseen 3 executions in his career, each one leaving a mark on his conscience he couldn't quite erase. Yet, for Carter, this was different. There was something about the young man's quiet resignation that gnawed at him. On the evening of August 14, 2025, the prison went into lockdown mode. Guards escorted Carter from his cell to a holding area adjacent to the execution chamber, his wrists and ankles shackled. He was allowed a final meal: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and a slice of apple pie, a modest request that reflected his simple tastes even in his final hours. A prison chaplain visited, offering prayers that Carter accepted with a nod but little emotion. The clock ticked toward midnight, and at 11:00 p.m., the warden read the death warrant aloud, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding Carter's gaze. The inmate was led to the gurney, strapped down, and the medical team prepared to insert the IV. Carter's breathing was shallow, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if searching for something beyond the concrete. Then, at 11:20 p.m., just 40 minutes before the scheduled time, the phone in the execution chamber rang. The room fell silent as Warden Hayes answered it. His expression shifted from routine detachment to stunned disbelief. The voice on the other end was from the governor's office, delivering an urgent stay of execution. New evidence had surfaced. A witness, a former gang member named Marcus Tate, had come forward with a confession. Tate claimed he had been the true perpetrator, framing Carter to settle a score with a rival. He provided details only the killer would know, and a retest of the knife's DNA, rushed through in the final hours, showed traces of Tate's blood alongside the victim's. The execution was halted, and Carter was unstrapped, his hands trembling as he was led back to his cell. The news spread like wildfire through the prison. Inmates banged on their cell doors, some in protest, others in relief. The next morning, August 15, 2025, a special hearing was convened at the county courthouse. Prosecutors fought to uphold the original verdict, arguing that Tate's testimony was unreliable and motivated by self-preservation. Carter's defense team, bolstered by a pro bono lawyer named Ellen Pierce, presented the new evidence with fervor. Pierce, a seasoned advocate for death row inmates, had seen cases like this before, last-minute reprieves that hinged on a single thread of truth. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Klein, listened intently as forensic experts testified about the DNA retest. After hours of deliberation, she announced her decision. The death sentence was overturned, and Carter would face a retrial. The courtroom erupted, and Carter, still in shackles, sat motionless, absorbing the weight of his second chance. The retrial began 2 weeks later, on August 29, 2025. Tate took the stand, his voice shaky but resolute as he recounted the crime. He admitted to the murders, describing how he had planted the knife on Carter after a botched robbery. The prosecution challenged his credibility, pointing to his criminal history, but the DNA evidence was undeniable. On September 5, 2025, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty for Carter, citing insufficient evidence of his involvement. The judge commuted his sentence to life with parole eligibility after 25 years, a decision that sparked both cheers and outrage. Carter was released that afternoon, stepping into the sunlight for the first time in 2 decades, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. The world outside was unrecognizable. It was now 2025, and technology had advanced. Smartphones were ubiquitous, self-driving cars hummed through the streets, and social media buzzed with his story. His mother had died 5 years earlier, her absence a silent wound. His sister Laura, now 40 with a family of her own, agreed to meet him but kept her distance, her trust shattered by his past. The media frenzy was relentless, with headlines like "Death Row Miracle" and "From Gurney to Freedom." Carter moved into a small apartment in Indianapolis, funded by a charity for exonerees, and began the slow process of rebuilding. He applied for jobs, construction, retail, anything. But his record as a former death row inmate scared off employers. Desperate, he enrolled in a community college, studying criminal justice, a choice that raised eyebrows but felt like a path to understanding his own story. Psychologists who worked with Carter noted his struggle with post-traumatic stress. Nightmares of the gurney haunted him, and the guilt of the victims' families weighed heavily. He wrote a letter to the victims' relatives, an apology that went unanswered. Community support was mixed. Some saw him as a symbol of a flawed justice system, others as a murderer who got lucky. He attended support groups for exonerees, where he met others who had faced similar odysseys. One man, released after 15 years on death row, told him, "Freedom is a gift, but it's also a test." Carter took those words to heart, volunteering at a legal aid clinic to help others navigate the system that nearly killed him. As of October 1, 2025, Carter remains on parole, checking in weekly with his officer. He works part-time at a bookstore, a job that lets him lose himself in stories, and dreams of one day teaching. The prison looms in his memory, a shadow he can't escape, but also a lesson he refuses to ignore. His life is a delicate balance, redemption on one side, reckoning on the other. The question lingers. Can a man truly outrun his past, or does it follow him like a ghost through every open door? For James Carter, the answer is still unfolding, a narrative written not in stone, but in the fragile hope of each new day. And as the sun sets on another day, Carter stands at his apartment window, gazing at the city lights, a faint smile breaking through. He whispers to himself, "Maybe tomorrow I'll find peace." The journey continues.